Alright, let's go. It's your boy Doc sticking his head out of the lab for an update. It has been a very busy few months, y'all, but I think I have some good stuff to show you and a problem. I've spent some evenings really leaning into my genre and design, as well as locking in most of my character mechanics and long-term power-ups. Next, I need to make a place to use all these cool abilities and hide all the goodies in boss fights. But once I started to build that place to play, I had a realization. While Metroidvania and Mega Man games can both be built on 2D platforming mechanics, both game styles have some very opposed design pillars that need to be aligned before the foundation of my game will be stable. Mega Man titles tend to be corridor-style levels, each leading to a boss and making the whole game more of a boss gauntlet. Meanwhile, Metroidvania zones and levels need to be interconnected and are designed to sprawl up and down as well as left and right. This means Mega Man levels need to push the player in a specific direction, while Metroidvania levels are closer to dungeons to comb and explore. I could wait until player testing, but that would mean leaving one of the most important synergies in my title until I have a playable slice with multiple levels. Any changes to the core design will affect much more once I have that much built. That just won't work. At the very least, I need to guide my initial designs so there is some planned interaction between the styles. We want to pivot as little as possible once people are playing full areas, or at least make the direction change a little less drastic. So yeah, that is a problem. Your boy is gonna need a plan. Just get it done. After 4 months, it is good to have an update for you all. What have I been up to? Well, my day job has been busy. Start of a new year, so we try to get solid momentum on projects. I have been making sure to have no 0 days. As noted, I nailed down most, if not all, of my player mechanics. Specifically, anything that was a maybe is now fleshed out and either locked in or moved to the save it for a sequel bin. While doing all of that on paper, I've been rebuilding the prototype you saw briefly last time in a cleaner production environment. This has included working on pooling so I can reuse objects, handling full controller mapping to support full controls, and then rebuilding my boxes, bullets, and character controller in that cleaner setup, and so much more. For now, that's all I have ready to show you. There is more to it for sure, but that will be a subject of a deeper video as I start implementing my actual levels. However, before I can build those levels, I need to design them, and that is where I hit a snag. So here's the problem. Mega Man levels follow a tried and true, old school design philosophy. They teach mechanics one by one before mixing them up in later parts of a level leading up to a boss. On the surface, this sounds a lot like a Metroidvania curve. Those games start in easier areas and teach mechanics or locks one at a time. Platforming challenges grow as the player moves deeper into the map and gains abilities. Meanwhile, zones usually close with a boss or challenge blocking some new power-up. Where these two styles of platformer differ is in the behavior that their level design encourages. Those Mega Man levels are very linear, almost hallways. They may be filled with interesting traps and enemies, but they are mainly something standing in the way of the player moving from A to B. Get past it by any means, and the player can move on. This was what made Rush Jet so overpowered in the original series. He could negate the entire point of rooms existing and generally teleport the player to the end of a challenge. Adding to this, doors aren't usually locked in these levels unless there is an enemy to beat. Most branches loop back to the main path or are very short dead ends for power-ups. This leads the player to just moving past most spurs when they don't need pickups or are in a hurry, which could lead to a true dead end in our design. Metroidvania maps are a different beast. While levels may introduce and ramp up new mechanics, these zones spread up and down, as well as left and right, much more. The corridor to the boss winds back on itself or connects back to another zone. These maps need to encourage exploration and combing every inch of the level. If a player skips entire rooms with an easy win approach, they may miss a crucial branch we want them to remember for later, or even the main path in areas where we mean them to hit an obstacle and need to go around. These two playstyles cause a problem for my designs. If we lean too hard into the challenges and obstacles without spurs, players will not get into the habit of exploring and searching. Because they'll need those skills later, this could make the endgame a slog. However, if we make the main boss levels too windy and interconnected from go, then players will spend endless time wandering the inner levels with no powers and bashing their head against locks instead of finding the keys. No, that just won't do. We need to marry the level design that pushes players towards the boss with that explorative habit that we need later, so they are moving towards bosses but ready for twists or to change course. Hopefully, we can also do this in a way that allows us to take the kid gloves off in the endgame, where the player no longer needs the guides. But this is not my first rodeo. As I like to tell my juniors, we are game developers, we solve problems. There may be a few ways to approach this, but while I'm still on paper and fleshing out the game systems, this was my approach. It's gonna sound like I'm hopping from one foot to another, but once I nailed this process down, my intro level and 8 core Mega Man levels assembled themselves from my theming and design, and I have a plan for the mid and end game tiers of play. For the uninitiated, there are several approaches to game and level design. The two I feel you need to understand before we begin are top-down and bottom-up. They are mostly what they say on the tin. Top-down design starts with the high-level game theme and genre. A platformer game set in future space Olympus, for example. Here, the team builds the game from the fantasy they are trying to invoke, and they assemble a narrower and narrower definition of that as they work towards the low-level gameplay. Choosing to play as the Titan of the Sun, pitting him against a Zeus-Jupiter amalgam with 8 support gods. These high-level design choices then inform the gameplay. 8 bosses with unique designs, so a boss gauntlet-style game is a nice way to put the characters into focus. And this is just one way I could arrive at my current design from top down. Bottom up is the opposite. The team starts with the moment-to-moment gameplay they want the player to feel. Tight, fast platforming and a 2D combat with room to freestyle advanced maneuvers. We then want levels and bosses made to push these fast platforming abilities. But any advanced controls usually mean teaching the player the abilities over time, so we might arrive at adding an arsenal of unlockable abilities that are tied to those bosses. Hey, that is starting to sound a lot like Mega Man again. This time we got here from the bottom-up approach, putting gameplay first. However, the end of Mega Man always left the player with a bunch of power and just a single castle to use it on, ending abruptly before there was really time to explore that whole arsenal. What if those Mega Man powers were just the core set of Metroidvania abilities that the player unlocks, and we use that castle as the mid-game or bad ending? Now we have the entire back half of the game left to really explore those boss powers and make challenges catering to having multiple of them. Now we've arrived at my core gameplay. As you might be able to tell, my actual approach for this title has been a hybrid approach, mixing top-down when I need broad strokes of design space narrowed in, then swapping to bottom-up when I really need to envision the game from moment to moment. This is not uncommon or something I invented by any means. These design approaches are just different tools for designing a game, so overly committing to one is often how games feel rigid or incomplete. Everything's a nail, something, you get the idea. And that hybrid approach is how I solve my little design pillars problem, a top-down, bottom-up design of my levels. Because I have both the larger theming of my title already worked out, and I've spent a lot of time in my prototype getting closer to the minute-to-minute feel that I want, I have 2 different jumping off points for each level. All I really need to do is get the top-down chocolate to meet the bottom-up peanut butter. First, the setup. It starts at the top with the theming. I knew I needed 8 bosses and wanted all the levels to connect. However, this could make the early game a maze. Using my chosen theming of the Sun Titan, and mostly planetary gods, led to centralizing the starting area and having difficulty radiate outward. Not super original, but it did let me connect levels and zones in close areas and force some more unique zone progression shapes in those early hallway levels. This got me to this starter map. Each of those colored spokes from the central hub zone is planned to be a 3-area trek to one of my bosses. Then, jumping to the bottom and thinking about how the player will navigate this map later, I added connections between areas where I felt the player could move between zones fluidly. Doing this before I sculpt the internal level means I'm not strapping it into the level later. As I build, I know where I need to make a spur of some kind. This first pass to the world map then lets us make the levels that need to fill it all out. Step 1. Choose a boss, add a twist. Now, back to the top. For each level, I choose a boss. Because I'm going for the planetary gods, I need to add a little variance to them to make them my own. Let's walk through how I re-themed Mercury or Hermes, also as you know him, Mercumes. An obvious choice for the god Damphion, since he appears prominently in Greek and Roman myths. He also has a very limited design space because his power set is so very specific. The running and speed are also something core to the myth of this god, so I can't just throw it out. I need to reuse it. Another thing this god is known for was musical acumen. We've used music in a few places in design already, including our main character, so this has a lot of room to align with themes. If we convert the lute to a more modern version, and then make this the centerpiece of a band, we get a very different speed god who uses his powers to amp up his shows. Step 2. Use the history, myths, and geography to theme the levels. Next, I use history and myth to inform the stage from the top again. Looking at his history, there is an association with high mountains as well as pastures. Since I want to incorporate this music theming into the character more, we start placing his level as the fields and a tailgating area of a concert venue, and then into the inner gardens and outer staging areas, with the final level being the topmost expensive seats leading to his boss arena on stage. Since we're moving from pastures to mountains, we get a solid climbing stage. Step 3. From god to boss. Now, how do we make a boss fight out of a speed god? I mean, mostly dodges and counters. I spent a lot of time looking at ways the player could be made to react rapidly to his positioning. He'll need to come in from multiple directions on screen and be gone just as fast. Add in time for solos to appease his audience as weak moments, and we get a good boss cadence. Not to spoil all the tricks he has up his sleeve. But teaching the player jump timing, where to avoid and use dashes, and reacting rapidly helps to build the level mechanics. We do want some of that Mega Man teaching style in the level. Enemies that charge, attacks from above with a tell, ways to bounce the player up so they must think about dodging and vertical placement. Waterfalls pushing downward to limit their motion and encourage timing. This really assembles a nice suite of mechanics to place across the level design. Step 4. Place the pieces on the board. Last, I take several hours placing enemies I want and platforming challenges to match all of this across the room and platform layout that I have. This at least gets the first pass. I won't know how it needs to change unless I walk through it more and feel it in-game. But when I get to the point of making this level, I have a hit list of the game mechanics and theming to create before I even create the scene in Unity. And I have had a paper prototype to edit and change rapidly when I'm not building. Whew. Okay, that was a lot. Let's review. We started by nailing down the boss theme beyond Greco-Roman god. The boss theming, including style, job, and historical source, led us to theme out the 3 levels of their zone. The flow of these levels is dictated by the direction we want the player to move, as well as the feeling we want to invoke. This also allows us to pre-plan map connections and breadcrumbing so that we're not too heavily training the player to just go left, while also making sure that they know the route towards their current goal. Those are our problematic pillars aligned. From here, we go back to the boss and start designing how we want them to fight with the powers the player will win from them. We take this and the theming back down to the bottom and design the mechanics for our traps and enemies that teach the boss mechanics or the actions we want the player to be better at if they complete this area. And finally, we plot the main path and traps to the boss, sprinkling in locked doors and breadcrumbs for shortcuts along the way. I leave a lot of the full connection details for other zones open. We may want to lock or unlock these more for some of the later gameplay elements. By planning the places my linear levels will connect, I'm able to design linear areas that loop around and past the connections that will be relevant later. Then, I added a small change where once a player chooses a boss they're targeting, a few smaller locks in the hub world will snap shut. From here, the player can only head out of the hub area towards their targeted boss, and if they want to get into another zone, they will need to re-choose or unlock abilities to get around different locks. This will hopefully funnel early players towards their goals, and then later, this lock setting becomes part of the way the player can configure the world for the later clockwork mechanics. While initially, I was worried that my level variance would be low. This process, along with pulling the myths into design and taking liberties with the origins, has led to a lot of levels I am really happy with. For example, a kitchen/restaurant level where the player needs to pass optional sets of mini-bosses, or a library level where the player needs to unlock the next path forward, encouraging looping. I have a trap-filled cave to get through blocked by walls, leading to a platforming and scrolling challenge over the high seas. I've got a jungle hunt for deer against other hunters to determine which gating mini-boss the player faces, and more, each meant to mix linear goals with exploration mechanics from Go. And that is just the core Mega Man loop. As noted, I do have an entire plan for the later levels. These are waiting at least until I can play my mechanics and get a feel for what is possible, but they still need an overarching design to inform the rest of the game. My plan is that all around this full map are some clockwork mechanics. Things that are happening whether the player is out there or not. And some of these will require being in the right place at the right time. While this will be quite a hard thing early, by the time the pieces all open up, or on future gameplay throughs, players will be able to understand what they need to do just from game knowledge. This clockwork endgame will allow pros to really press how little they need to beat the game, while new players can take their time and explore until they have their bearings. Around the point that they clear the Wily Castle, they should have mechanical understanding enough to really explore the external areas of the map. At the moment, I just have the rough mechanics of these goals fleshed out. As I build the maps and tighten the controls and abilities, I will start solidifying these zones and designs. These outer areas are also where I need to hide the more powerful abilities in the game, so I need to make sure I understand the full curve of these abilities before I place them on the map. That's it. My process for designing a level from theme to mechanics to end. While I did hand-wave a lot of this, I am planning to do a follow-up once this level is built in-game so we can evaluate how this plan worked out and if there are any common things that were missed in my level designs. We'll probably also revisit this process when I start on the outer zones to show how this process changes when we're not building a corridor to boss level and need to flip the player's goals on their head. But this is just my process. It's tailored to my small team size and the needs of my title. I am curious, how would you solve this? Or have you solved conflicting designs in your titles? Share your pain in the comments below. We have all been there. And while you're at it, Don't forget to like and subscribe while ringing that bell for round 3. And once again, we're at the end of my topic. Piles of levels still to build, so many mechanics to implement. But if I sit around staring at the work, the pile will never shrink. Guess it's time to just get it done. Since I'm still working on the formats for these videos, I'm going to try out an end card for any bookkeeping I might have for unrelated topics to the video. If this proves tedious or I see information getting lost here, then I'll try to work it all into the blogs more organically. Let me know what you think. Your engagement can really help narrow this down. Speaking of engagement, I want to take a moment to thank you for being here, as well as thanking you for all the support on the intro and pitch video. Did not think people would enjoy me rambling that much, but even more reason, make it fun. Sorry to keep you waiting so long. Some of you know this was teased locally a long time ago. Where have I been? Busy, mainly. Day job has been a focus, and this is still just a side project. Good busy, a lot of exciting projects, but that still means giving it my all. As for this, I have maintained no 0 days and have been getting a lot of the scaffolding set up. Where I additionally got distracted was an opportunity to partake in a development retreat, but to do so, I need a lot of moving pieces ready so that this whole retreat can be spent building gameplay. So when it came to recording or making those required parts, I prioritized unknown tech and big design work over recording. This script has been done other than this end card since early March, if that's any context. But in good news, this means I pushed back so far that as I get into June, I will already be able to start recording the next video, and I'll be past the development retreat where it'll be less of a rush. More content coming soon. Speaking of, some of you did reach out with specific feedback as well, and I'm taking that into account for what my topics are what topics I aim for. For example, there was an ask that I delve into the more non-technical topics like my world building and theming. And don't worry, I plan to alternate between tech talks and the more design-focused topics. I have noticed many, but not all dev blogs lean into the technical, so maybe this is how we add a little pop. Again, constructive criticism can create complete comments. See? There is more I want to talk about, exciting developments in both the design, the look, and the feel of the game, but I'll save those. Some are not fully cooked, and others could be their own video. Let's go with many good things coming. Keep an eye on this space. And again, thanks for watching. See you next time.